Hi YouTube, it's Kathy, and this is my weekly entertainment wrap-up for July 6th through 12th. This week I read 3 books, I watched 2 shows, I watched 2 movies, and I listened to 3 books. First this week we have The Only Good Indians. This is a horror novel about this group of Blackfeet who one day went hunting and hunted in an area that they shouldn't have been hunting in, and 10 years later they see the repercussions of that. This one was really interesting because basically the prologue starts out with one of the 4 people that had been hunting, and it was a little while after that incident, and something goes on in a parking lot of a bar, and he's inebriated, so it makes it even more difficult for him to comprehend what's going on, but it gives us kind of a taste of what's to come. And then from there we follow one of his buddies who actually moved away from the res about 10 years ago. He's got this girlfriend, he's got this job at the post office, everything seems to be fine, but then something happens to make him feel like the elk that he took down and actually promised to not waste anything of back when his buddies were hunting where they shouldn't have been hunting might be mad at him, and something might have happened. And he has really good reasons to think that, and I'll let you explore that as you go. This book is equal parts anticipation and build up to something happening, really gory stuff, and then talking about basketball, because a lot of these characters talk about basketball. And not in a bad way, I'm not complaining about that, it was just a lot of this book. The next book we need to talk about is The Midnight Library, and this is definitely one of those books where you need to read trigger warnings ahead of time, because we know from the very beginning of this book that the main character has about 9 hours until she is going to decide she no longer wants to be on this earth. And then we proceed to see her have an absolutely terrible day. Once she decides to leave, she does something to make that a reality, and then wakes up at a place called the Midnight Library. This library seems to go on forever and be completely deserted except for herself and this woman named Mrs. Elm, who is actually her school librarian. Mrs. Elm shows her her own personal book of regrets, which is very long, and then tells her, hey, do you have any of these regrets that you'd like to see your life if you didn't do whatever these regrets resulted from? And she's like, actually I just kind of want to not be here anymore, but sure, I'll play your game, I guess. And she gets to see all these different lives and how they would have worked out if she had made different decisions. Given this subject matter, this one is heartfelt and heart-wrenching, but it's also beautifully written and so interesting to see what would have happened if she had diverged on her path at any point, especially because in the lead up to this we know all of these things that she has giant regrets of, especially because in the lead up to her going to this library we see her regretting all of these different things that are factors in her life. This was done absolutely beautifully. Next, a book I read all in one day is You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight. This is about a girl named Charity, and she works as the final girl at this horror simulation at this location that was actually used in the 80s to create a horror movie. Basically, customers show up, they're checked into one of the cabins, they're told to go to the main lodge at 8 o'clock, and then suddenly somebody comes into the cabin already bleeding. People have to figure out how to try to escape the killer. And she's really good at this. She's actually also kind of the boss of this, because the guy who owns the place is supposed to technically be there, but he's never there, and she's running the show, which is, you know, not exactly legal because everybody who works there is a teenager. And as we're meeting her, she's annoyingly short-staffed because 3 of the people that are supposed to be there for the end of season have just no-showed. So she calls in some reinforcements in the form of her girlfriend and her best friend, and they're just going to have to try to help out for the last couple of nights. Does that go smoothly? Absolutely not. Are there a bunch of twists and turns in this book? Absolutely. This is one of those books where I'm really glad I read it all in one day, basically in one sitting, because it's one of those books that really draws you in and you want to know what's going to happen, and you're concerned about, whoa, what if they do this and what if they do that and what's going to happen around this corner, and it was just a lot of fun. As for the shows I watched this week, we watched the previous week's episode of Jet Lag as well as this week's episode of Jet Lag because we had just forgotten to watch the previous week's during that week. And I don't have too much to say besides one of the people is definitely dominating that scoreboard, but I will tell you that in this season the lads are playing a game of Snake in South Korea. So basically they're going on the train systems and they're going through the different nodes of the train systems, and there's cards that they can pull and different shenanigans they can do so that the people who aren't being the snake are trying to block the person who is the snake. It's really fun and an interesting way to see little bits of a different country. As for the other show I watched, of course, it was Silent Witness. The last time I talked to you, I was in season 15 of Silent Witness, and this week I finished that season. For a show that in theory could get really formulaic, this show has this ability to just kind of do these outlandish type of premises, and I think that's in part because we don't have a main character, we have 3 main characters, and we have different episodes that have different focuses on one of the 3 characters or 2 of the 3 characters, and somebody else could be off doing something else. And one duo of episodes had Julie Comer in it, which was great because I, kept looking at her and I'm like, why does she remind me of Fern Brady? This isn't Fern Brady, but who is this woman? And of course, it's the woman from Killing Eve, just like a decade younger. And then this was also the same 2-episode arc that had the guy that plays Lucifer on Lucifer in it. Not that I've actually watched that show, but my roommate has watched that show, so I've walked into episodes of that show and been like, ah, you're watching Lucifer again. Needless to say, continuously entertained, continually very amused by seeing all of the different people that I see on it that I know from other things. As for the 2 movies I watched this week, both of them were sequels. The first one was Jurassic Park 2. I thought at some point in my youth I must have seen this, but as I watched this movie I was like, yep, none of this is familiar. So I figured to myself, maybe I just missed this one in the series. Like, that can happen. You can watch this kind of popular movie series and not necessarily watch every single one, but still be able to understand and know what's going on in the next one, because anything you need to know they'll just kind of tell you in dialogue. Which is why when I went into Jurassic Park 3, I was like, clearly I've seen this one before, right? And it turns out, no. I don't know how I got through my childhood without watching these sequels, but apparently I did. Also, I was so confused about the Mandela effect of connecting Nokia phones to Jurassic Park, because I thought at some point there was a do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do-do, and that gets somebody eaten by a T-Rex, and that did not happen. Now I'm wondering if that was actually just a Nokia commercial, and that got burned into my brain. And if so, that was a really good advertising campaign, but now I'm gonna have to look it up. What I liked about these is you got certain elements of the previous cast in both of these, but you don't get the full cast from the first one in both of these, if that makes any sense. It makes sense to me. But regardless, you do get the cast talking about the other people and being like, oh yeah, did you read so-and-so's book? Yeah, I think he's pretentious too, or whatever. On to the audiobooks I listened to this week, the first one being The Perks of Being a Wallflower. This is something long overdue because this has been on my TBR for years. In fact, for whatever reason, it was marked as already read on Goodreads back in like 2014, but I definitely hadn't read it before. I think that might have been when I was trying to hit it onto my TBR and just hit the wrong button. This one is written in a letter format by this kid named Charlie who is going through some things. At the beginning of the school year, we find out that a former classmate of his actually left this existence, so he's feeling ramifications about that. He's also pretty lonely because he doesn't really have many friends, because that was basically his one friend, and then they had another friend, but she's become popular now because like she had a growth spurt over the summer and she doesn't really talk to him anymore. And he's writing these letters to a person that we don't know who it is, but he's basically been like, I'm going to sort of anonymize these letters because I want to send them to you because I feel like you would actually read them, but I don't want to tell you too many things so you don't know exactly who I am. Through these letters, he's just talking really frankly about his life and his experiences and meeting new friends and sometimes going to parties and what happens at those parties and these different experiences here, there, and everywhere, and it was just so well written and also makes you feel so much for this character. Again, this is another book that has a lot to do with mental health, so you're going to want to look up trigger warnings ahead of time. And on a way happier note, yesterday we were playing Trivial Pursuit, and by that I mean we were just reading questions off the cards because we weren't actually playing the game like you're supposed to, and I was the only person at the table who was able to tell you that a biscuit in hockey refers to the puck, because that was something that came up in this book. And I am notorious in this group of people to be like, yeah, no, I read that in a book, and I was able to do that and be like, yeah, no, I read that literally 5 days ago in an audiobook. I am a learned person. Next on my list of audiobooks is Sea of Tranquility. This one is very interesting because we primarily get 4 different time frames, and if you're listening to it as an audiobook, this means you get 4 different narrators. This one starts out in 1912, and we're following this man who has basically been exiled to Canada because he had certain political views, which were basically like, colonization, we're doing it and we shouldn't be doing it, right? Essentially, a lot of his very British family grew up in India, and he spent a lot of time in India, and his mom is really fond of being in India. And he was like, yeah, but the people that are from there, that were able to exist before us for like millennia, didn't really want us there. And his dad is so mad at this that he's like, okay, well, we're sending you to Canada. Which honestly doesn't really sound too bad because his family has money and basically he doesn't have to work, so he just gets to like go hang out in Canada, but he finds his way to Vancouver Island, which is where I live. And initially he makes it to the capital of the province, which is Victoria, and then he makes his way up the island to a very small village called Cayette. And one day when he's walking in the woods, he sees and experiences something a little bit strange. From there, we flash to a different timeline of this woman in 2020, and she's trying to track down a previous friend of hers. This timeline starts going really in depth as to why her and her friend initially fell out and the whole ramifications of that, and she finds out something about her friend that makes her really sad, and of course it is the very beginning of 2020, so we know things are coming. And from there, our next perspective is this author living about 200 years later, and she actually lives on one of the colonies of the moon, but she's currently on Earth on a book tour. And through this character, Emily St. John Mandel was able to kind of talk to some of the things I'm sure she was asked during 2020, because this author wrote a book a while ago that had to do with a pandemic, and by that I both mean this author character as well as Emily St. John Mandel, which was her debut novel Station 11, which I really enjoyed when it was published, and then it definitely saw a resurgence of people reading it in 2020. And then our fourth timeline is about another 100 or 200 years in the future, and this character actually knows about this author. In fact, her house is down the street from where he grew up on the colonies. Are these all tied together? Yes, they absolutely are. Did I go into this not knowing there were a bunch of different timelines and not knowing how they're connected, but kind of figure out maybe how in the second timeline? Yes. This book has to do with different timelines and cultures and people and places and things, and also theories about the universe itself, and it's also beautifully written, and I highly recommend it. The third and final audiobook I listened to this week is Cactus Country. This is a boyhood memoir written by this person who is gender fluid. To the best of my knowledge, they currently use she and they pronouns, so those are the ones I'm going to use. However, the majority of this memoir is focused on their boyhood, so when they definitely identified mostly as being a boy, and even at school would try to portray themselves as a boy, and not really give people a straight answer when they would inevitably be like, are you a boy or a girl? Because at that point in their life, it definitely pleased them for people to just assume that they were a masculine person. This one had a lot of interesting things to say about how people are socialized and how people are treated based on gender, and this author certainly has a way with words, which makes a lot of sense because not only do we cover the boyhood aspect, we also cover the early 20s, and initially I was wondering why we were covering that time frame of the author's life, because it's a boyhood memoir, but I feel like it was important to continue into that time frame when the author was learning how to write and taking all of these different writing courses and masters and that type of thing, because we see this big juxtaposition between how she identified previously and how she's just trying to not do anything about gender at this point, because honestly it sounds exhausting. This is a book I kind of picked up on a whim because I knew it had gender fluid representation, and that's one of the prompts for Read Queer All Year this month, but now I'm going to have to try to figure out if this author has any other works that I can read because I really enjoyed this. That's it for this week. If you've read, watched, or listened to any of these, let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down in the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment but want to make sure that I know you're here, just leave me an emoji or a smiley face if you happen to be on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that, as always, is down below. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!